Chief Health Strategist, will provide an update on the COVID-19 pandemic and response here in our region. Please welcome Dr. Sarah.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me today. So yeah, Sarah Moyer. I'm the director of the health department here in town. Been with the department since 2015 and director since 2017. You probably recognize me. Public health went from being that agency that keeps you healthy and you don't know it to being front and center in the last 6 months. So become front and center as well too. But so yeah, COVID update, just a little thing that we are dealing with here in Louisville. I wanted to share our dashboard that is located online. And hold on one second as I pull that up. It's a great place to go if you are looking for the latest data, and the best place to find that is just by going to either the main LouisvilleKY.gov website and clicking on the COVID-19 spot, and then you click on the data and you can bring it up, or you can also get to it from our health department webpage. So as of today, we've had over 16,000 cases here in Jefferson County and over 300 deaths. We are tracking kind of the state of the pandemic in a green, yellow, orange, red category. This is the same as what the CDC and now the state is doing and trying to, whether or not schools can come back in session. And so we're in orange now, and that's because our case rate per day is about 10 to 25 cases per every 100,000 residents here in Jefferson County. Our deaths are remaining stable. Our hospitals have plenty of capacity, but because we're getting over 1,000 cases or close to 1,000 cases a week now, just don't quite have the public health capacity in order to do full contact tracing. So this is a graph of our cases by week. You can see we had less cases early on in the pandemic, but that was because we didn't have the testing capacity. We were only able to test people that were sick enough to have to go to the hospital for treatment. But as testing capacity has increased, we were able to test pretty much anyone who had symptoms by the end of May, and now have plenty of tests to test anyone who wants one. As you can see, we saw a big increase in cases starting really after the July 4th holiday. COVID grows exponentially, just meaning that if we have uncontrolled spread happening, you'll see the case numbers doubling every week. So we went from 300 early on July to 600 to 1,200 and on up, and it's kind of leveled off since then in mid-August. And kind of just waiting now to see, we don't know yet what would have happened after Labor Day weekend. So just waiting and seeing and encouraging anyone who has symptoms to get tested. This is the graph of the deaths here in Jefferson County. We get deaths reported, and we're graphing them here based on the date of death. So unlike the reported date above, if we get a death reported to us today and it happened 2 weeks ago, it'll go on the chart from 2 weeks ago. So so the last kind of week is in a sense inaccurate because we don't have all the numbers yet. But holding steady at about 10 a week or so for the last month, and hoping that stays that way or goes down. And then the last piece is that testing positivity that I was talking about. This is a measure of how many tests we have available in our community and if we're doing enough testing. So as you can see, when we're having so many cases, we did not have enough tests available in the community at that point in time. So if you remember back, it was taking people 7 days to schedule a test. It was taking them 7 to 10 days to get the test back. And that's not helpful in public health. We want to be able to test people as soon as they have symptoms and then be able to contact their contacts within 24 hours of getting that result back so they can then stay home and prevent the spread to others. So that was not possible then. We do have plenty of tests now. Our positivity rate is down by 5. And if you go on our website, I will show you down below how to get to all of the testing sites. Most of them you can schedule same day appointments, and a lot of the places are getting results back in 12 hours or less. Majority, almost all of them are within 72, but most are in that 12 to 24 hour turnaround now. And the next one, the graph takes a minute to pop up here, but it's the hospitalizations. And when that shows, you'll see that hospitalizations increased about 2 weeks after the cases increased in community. We know that that's just the timeline of coronavirus. So the top ones, the ICU and ventilator cases, so really high at the end of August versus the highest point in the cases were early on in August. And same thing with the hospitalization. And here we go. A graph there. And then you can also see too the percent of everyone who's in the hospital. It's the percent of people that have COVID that are in there. So only 8% of people that are in the hospital right now are there because of COVID. And so just a marker to show that we have capacity. Our hospitals have surge capacity, meaning they can go even beyond the beds that they have available now. So COVID's small part of our hospitalizations, but potential to really increase going forward. And then this is uploading as well. I'm sorry, I'm working from home today with slower internet. And this is a graph of where the cases are in the community. And this is since the beginning of the pandemic. Not necessarily where the positive cases are in the last 2 weeks, but where they've been since March. So you can see here all the zip codes of where cases are coming from. We know that back early on in the pandemic, when a lot of us had the privilege of being able to stay home, so most of our lower income neighborhoods were our essential workers, and we're still going to work to make sure the rest of us still had food and electricity and all those necessities to live. And so COVID was spreading the most among those people in our community. And I guess there's just something to really highlight with the turmoil and everything happening. COVID really kind of brought to light all the inequities that are in our community, in our nation, in the world, really, with respect to healthcare and police violence and education, and just really it's really brought to national attention everything that's going on. And so if you are interested in exploring kind of what's behind the numbers and why we're seeing those inequities, we've got a great link here that goes to our health equity report, which shows where we have different outcomes based on race and location in our community, and kind of explains why our Black colleagues in the city and our Hispanic residents are experiencing more COVID and worse outcomes than our white residents. So this is just, the next one's just demographics by race and cases. So you can see here that the yellow is the number of confirmed cases, and the gray is the number of people in Jefferson County. So you can see our our white residents are having less COVID cases than there are white residents in the city. And our Black residents are having more COVID than the percentage of Black, and same with our Hispanic ethnicity as well too in this chart here. And then gender-wise, about equal, more females are getting more cases, as well as more of the deaths compared to our male colleagues. And this is by age group here. So you can see more COVID cases in our younger age groups, especially since July, when more of our younger groups went back to work, traveled, went to school and sports, and university opened, than our older residents. But then the percentage of our deaths is definitely higher in our older residents. And then if you also, I don't have this one online, but if you look at it by race, so maybe the percentage of our Black and Hispanic colleagues doesn't look too drastic compared to the white, but the age of death is younger. And so if this graph was just our Black, it would be about 10 years younger, and our Hispanic is about 20 years younger when you graph it out. So just another thing that's really, COVID's really emphasizing the inequities in our community. So the other thing, if you need a testing site, please click here. We have over 21 sites. As I said, there's plenty of capacity. So if you ever need a test, please click there. You can schedule most of them online and show up. These are all the symptoms if you need a reminder for it. But cough, fever are the main ones that we talked about early, but we're really seeing that the fatigue and diarrhea and loss of smell are some of the early signs. So if you've gotten any of these symptoms and they're not normal for you, so if you always have allergies and a runny nose, I wouldn't worry about that. But if it's a new thing for you, would consider getting tested or recommend getting tested and staying away from friends and family. Hand washing, social distancing, wear a mask. I think everyone has heard those messages again and again, so not going to harp on that, but really, really important. Also, ventilation is huge and key, so just please make sure that if you are around other people, especially those that you know are not staying home, maybe like you are, that you're outside, you're 6 feet apart, and you have a mask on, and that's really how we're going to stop the spread of coronavirus. And then the last piece is contact tracing, which is a tool that we have that we've used in public health for hundreds of years. I had 5 contact tracers that worked on things like tuberculosis and HIV and mumps and measles and chickenpox before coronavirus. And so transitioned to that, and we've been training, and we've got a subcontract with Lacuna Health right now that is helping us ramp that up quickly. They've hired close to 200 people now that are doing the contact tracing for us. And so if you test positive, they will call you, and then they will do a really in-depth interview trying to find out where you might have exposed other people in the 2 days before you started having symptoms, and getting those phone numbers and hearing about those people so they could call those people and tell them that they have to stay home for 14 days to monitor themselves for symptoms, just in case they come down with it. That's coronavirus is most contagious kind of really the day before you start to have symptoms, and then those first couple days. And so trying to keep people home before they realize they have it. And the best way to do that is contact tracing and letting know people that are possibly might get COVID are home and aren't out in our schools and our workplaces at big events that our community is having. And that's how we're going to keep our community safe.
Thank you. I just have one thing more I want to ask you, and Sarah, that is about the antibody testing. Is that part of the testing sites? Can you get antibody testing at those places as well, or where do you get that?
So the only place really to get antibody testing right now is part of University of Louisville's co-immunity study, and they did testing back in June, and they just finished their second round right now. And so I don't think there's any place doing it. I think the last day was last Friday in order to do that. There are antibody tests that you can get from your physician's office, but the accuracy of those is kind of unknown. And the only place that really I would trust would be part of a research study to see. So if you think you were exposed and you think you had it, I would still follow the preventative public health measures like wearing a mask and staying 6 feet apart and limiting activities and contacts. I don't think that should change anything. They thinking that if you've had it, you probably have immunity for about 3 months, and then there's the potential of getting reinfected. So even if you did have it, I would tell you to try not to get it again, because it's still a possibility.
Okay, very good, Sarah. Well, we really appreciate
your tremendous dedication and the service to keeping our citizens safe. So thank you and your team. And now Dick Clay, a member of the Rotary Club since 1997, will introduce today's guest speaker. Dick is a prominent attorney, and he now serves as the president and CEO of the Filson Historical Society, one of the Commonwealth's true treasures. Please welcome Dick.
Thank you, Julie. As a COVID-19 survivor who was on a ventilator for 7 days, I would publicly like to thank Dr. Sarah Moyer for her work and the science, the epidemiology, and the facts that went into its preparation. We are so completely dependent on your work, and the importance of what you're doing cannot be overemphasized. Thank you. My friend Jim Holmberg, where to start? James Holmberg is a native of Louisville, and he holds his BA and MA degrees from the University of Louisville. He joined the staff of the Filson in 1982 and currently serves as the Filson Historical Society curator. Jim researches, writes, and lectures on a variety of historical subjects, primarily relating to Kentucky, the Lewis and Clark expedition and its Kentucky members are an area of special focus. Jim is, bottom line, the Filson's ambassador to the world. He is well known, highly regarded, beloved by everybody who knows him and gets to work with him, and one of the finest, most full of common sense and good judgment people that I know. Jim?
Well, thank you, Dick. I appreciate those kind words. And our topic, as you all know, is Let the Mud Fly, a sampling of the, let me get this from the beginning here, there we go, a sampling of contentious presidential campaigns. We could say every presidential campaign is contentious, but some more so than others. And I'm just going to hit a few of the highlights. The tip of the iceberg, so to speak, and then take questions afterwards. Of course, timing is excellent. Julie Skoski-James really was looking ahead when she asked me to do this earlier this year. We have to start with this guy, George Washington. He set the tone and the tradition of the American presidency. He had no competition, actually, so there wasn't contention there. And the true campaigns and elections began with John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. 1796 and 1800, the mudslinging began. Adams was a Federalist. Thomas Jefferson was a Democratic Republican. The Federalists believed in a strong central government. The Democratic Republicans believed in states' rights and to have more power with the states. Over his first term and then in the 1800 election, there were charges back and forth that Adams was too close to Great Britain, that he was an autocrat, kind of a despot. Jefferson, of course, was very much a Francophile. He had at first said good things about the French Revolution, but of course with the Reign of Terror that slacked off. And it got personal. Published reports said that Jefferson had an African-American slave mistress, which actually was true, Sally Heming, as we know. But Adams won with the strong Federalist follow-up from Washington in '96, and Jefferson, in really a twist, and that had to be fixed by the 12th Amendment, won in 1800. These are kind of the 6 Ds of poisonous politics. Some of them are really kind of, they're synonyms in a way, but a little different. Denounce, disparage, damn, decry, denigrate, and declaim. And then here's the various methods through our history. Newspapers, pamphlets, handbills, broadsides, barbecues, rallies, pins, coins, buttons, songs, parades, ribbons, speeches, and then of course the modern media kicks in with radio and TV, and now with the internet, which plays a very important role. The election of 1824, it was still a one-party system, the Democratic Republicans, but they'd really split.
Yeah. Jim, could you do screen share?
I don't know if I can do that.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all right. Is nobody seeing my PowerPoint?
No.
Right.
Well, I don't know. Alyssa, can Alyssa do that?
Go down to the bottom of your screen where it says share screen in the middle. It's a green icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
Oh, back onto Zoom there, yeah.
Yes.
I thought we'd already set that up.
You still had to push the share screen button.
Oh, I guess I lost it at some point. Let me try to get, well, there we go, see it. Well, is
Fingers crossed.
Let me try it again here. Tell my my technical abilities.
There you go. You're starting. There you
There
go.
we
Now
go.
click
Great.
beginning.
There we go. I'll also run through these others really quick then, so we bring everybody up to speed. There we go.
Perfect.
All right, look good now? All right, sorry about that. So we're letting the mud fly. Washington starts. He sets the tone and tradition. He had no competition, so really it wasn't until Adams and Jefferson squared off in 1796 and 1800 that the mudslinging began. And you heard, without the benefit of the images, but you heard my audio, I assume, in which you know what the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans stood for. And there you can see the 6 Ds of poisonous politics: denounce, disparage, damn, decry, denigrate, and declaim, and the methods used, from newspapers and pamphlets to rallies, coins, buttons, and of course now with modern media, TV, radio, and the internet. In 1824, it was still one party, the Democratic Republicans, but it was a 4-way race. The party had fragmented. The era of good feeling under James Monroe was over, and John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, William Crawford, and Henry Clay all contended for the presidency. It was the first presidential election crisis since the Jefferson-Burr tie of 1800. And of course, as we know there, somebody didn't throw their vote away and everybody voted Jefferson-Burr. Burr was supposed to be vice president, but technically he tied with Jefferson, and it had to go to the House of Representatives to actually declare Jefferson president and not Burr. And it wasn't easy, 36 ballots before Jefferson was finally chosen, and Hamilton is the one that pushed it to Jefferson. So it was a popular versus the electoral vote in the House. And here you can see this map. It actually shows Jackson had widespread support. Clay in the West, Crawford, who had ill health, he'd had a stroke and probably couldn't even have served, in Virginia and Georgia, and then Adams very much in the Northeast. The election was referred to the House because Jackson, even though he won the popular vote and had an edge in the electoral vote, had not won the majority of electoral votes needed. Henry Clay loathed Jackson. Jackson loathed Clay, and Clay was damned if he was going to let Jackson become president if he could help it. He thought he was a real danger to the Republic. He supported Adams then, and he ignored Kentucky's instructions to vote for Jackson and put the support instead to Adams, and Adams hence became president. Clay became Secretary of State, which at that time was a stepping stone to the presidency. And Adams then and Clay had the charge of a corrupt bargain leveled against them, and that Jackson had been robbed of his rightfully deserved spot as president. This was something that haunted Clay for the rest of his political career. In 1828, it was Adams versus Jackson again, and Jackson supporters were determined to have their hero win, not get cheated. Emotions ran high and the charges flew thick. There was a 2-party system now, the Democrats and the National Republicans. Jackson, Democrat; Adams, Clay, National Republicans. The letters you see, and you can't really read them here on the right, but this is the bread and butter of research. It's the letters, the diaries, the campaign literature, the newspapers that historians really have to use in order to write the histories. The visuals are great, and they're very useful and very important, but it's the manuscripts that are so important. These come out of Filson's collection, as almost everything that you'll see here visually that are coming from our collection. Samuel Catlett wrote Henry Buckner, stressing majority must rule and lamenting the filth that's being spread. And some of this filth was, or the mud anyway, was that Adams was an elitist and a despot, the American system and the stronger federal government. Jackson was married to an adulteress, which technically had been true. She thought she was divorced, but her ex-husband had not followed through officially. That Jackson was a slave trader. Well, he was a slave owner, and he did buy and sell slaves, but not on a slave trader level. That he was a murderer of innocent Indians. Well, he was an Indian fighter. He had led an army against the Creeks in the Creek War, and he had given no quarter to some Indians, killing women and children as well as men. He was a duelist. He had killed somebody in a duel, and he carried a bullet from a duel the rest of his life. And that he was a military chieftain, but he was very popular and he easily won. Clay was forever an optimist, and he thought he'd win in 32. He referred, and the emerging Whigs, but still the National Republicans, considered him King Andrew, that he was a despot and an autocrat. Clay predicted victory, but he got trounced. And what's interesting, and I use this as the beginning slide, this is how parental influence, peer influence, whatever you want to think of, but here's a school student who has painted a little picture of Clay coming on and Jackson going off. So he's been absorbing from his adults, his father, mother, others around him, the whole politics of what's going on. In 1840, it was Harrison versus Van Buren. Van Buren had been Jackson's chosen successor, had defeated Harrison in 36. And he won with a new style of campaigning that was emerging, with the parades, the torchlight parades, some of the speeches, the stump speaking going on, and sheet music and other visuals like this, the buttons and what have you. Slogans like Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Tippecanoe meaning Harrison, who had led an army to victory against the Indians in 1811 in Indiana. And Martin Van Ruin instead of Buren, because he'd been dealing with the Panic of 1837. The log cabin myth, hey, make it up, it sounds good. That Harrison was a man of the frontier, born in a log cabin. Not true. He was of the Virginia gentry. He'd been born in a brick mansion. He probably lived in one of the finest houses in Indiana, as Grouseland, there in Vincennes, when he'd been territorial governor. But he was a military hero dating back to the War of 1812, and he swept to victory. Of course, he died a month into office and thwarted the Whigs in trying to finally have their man in the White House. 1844 was the third time a charm for Harry of the West. Well, not so much. He thought he had a really good chance against James K. Polk, who was considered a dark horse candidate, but he again was a close Jackson ally. He'd been Speaker of the House, and this is how sometimes one issue can sink you. The Texas question and territorial expansion. And Clay came out publicly against the annexation of Texas and territorial expansion. And that was a pretty popular topic among both parties, and it lost him votes. And then a third party candidate, James G. Birney of the Liberty Party, an emerging abolitionist feeling in the North, he siphoned away some votes too. There might have been some chicanery going on, but Clay lost in something of what was considered an upset to Polk. The next contentious collection, of course, is 1860, where you have four candidates running, very sectional, the Democrats North and South. Southern Democrat John C. Breckinridge, a Kentuckian. He'd been James Buchanan's vice president, the youngest vice president ever. States' rights and protection of slavery. The Northern Democrat, Stephen Douglas. He was for popular sovereignty. In fact, he'd started and opened up that whole can of worms again in the 1850s with the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Abraham Lincoln, the Republicans, very Northern party, hardly any support south of the Ohio River or the Mason-Dixon line. Limit the expansion of slavery, maintain the Union. John Bell for the Constitutional Union Party. Adhere to the Constitution, maintain the Union. And you can see how he already in campaign literature was being marked as a traitor. He was from Tennessee, and they felt that he was not supporting the South as he should. In 1864, it was Lincoln against McClellan. And would it be war or peace? There was a lot of war weariness in the North. And actually, Lincoln did not run as a Republican. He ran as an unconditional Union candidate, and as his running mate was a war Democrat from East Tennessee, Andrew Johnson. The Democratic Party went with George McClellan, who was very popular. He'd actually been kind of put on the shelf as a general. It was said that he built beautiful armies, very capable armies, but he was afraid to use them. And he, even though he didn't necessarily believe in a negotiated peace with the South, that was one of the big things that the Democrats were running on. Lincoln won in really something of a landslide. The fall of Atlanta in September of '64 was a big help. The soldier vote was a big help. The Democrats played the race card. They really used Lincoln and his policies regarding African Americans, especially the Emancipation Proclamation, against him, but it did not lead to his defeat. And of course, we all know what happened just soon after he was inaugurated in '65. The election of 1876. This was a very important election. Rutherford B. Hayes versus Samuel Tilden. And this election ended up causing the end of Reconstruction. Hayes was declared the winner, but Samuel Tilden, was he the true winner? He won the majority of the popular vote, but 3 southern states still under Reconstruction control, federal control, were declared undecided. And that something had happened, and a commission was formed for South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana to decide who really won those states. Well, not surprisingly, with a Republican majority of the commission, Hayes was declared the winner, even though Tilden had swept the rest of the South. So it was kind of like the fix was in. The Democrats, though, did exact promises and said, okay, Hayes can be president, but we want an end to Reconstruction in the South. And so it was the Compromise of 1877, ended Reconstruction, but with it, and the Southerners really taking more control of their own politics, governments there, a lot of the legal protections for and gains by African Americans suffered. Jim Crow grows, things like that. 1884 was another one. Interesting one. James G. Blaine of Maine, Grover Cleveland of New York ran against each other, Republican Blaine, Democrat Cleveland. And it was a real campaign of smears and mistakes. It was a very close contest. New York was decided by fewer than 3,000 votes. And New York went for Cleveland, so he won. But both candidates had moral baggage. Blaine was morally corrupt in that he sold influence to railroad and Wall Street interests when he'd been in the House of Representatives. That didn't keep him from being the Republican candidate, though. He was seen as kind of running with the high and the rich. He alienated reform-minded Republicans called mugwumps, which helped the Democratic cause. And a Protestant minister, just days before the election, in talking to Blaine and supporting him, referred to the Democrats as the party of rum, Romanism, and rebellion in New York City. There are a lot of Irish Catholics in New York City and Catholics who weren't Irish, and that really alienated them, and it helped Cleveland win. Cleveland, the big slam against him, because he was called Grover the Good for how morally high he was, but he took responsibility for fathering an illegitimate child. It's questionable whether he was really the father or he was covering for some of his married buddies who might have actually fathered the child. And the Republicans had the cry of, "Ma, Ma, where's my pa?" To which the Democrats cheerfully responded once he was president, "Gone to the White House, ha, ha, ha." 1896, 1900, same two run against each other. McKinley, the Republican, front porch campaign, he doesn't really go anywhere. They use scare tactics. It's very well funded. They paint William Jennings Bryan of Nebraska, great nickname here, the Boy Order of the Platte. His famous Cross of Gold speech, in which the Democrats wanted to have the U.S. go off the gold standard, one of the great orators of the day, but he was painted as kind of this wild agrarian socialist who was going to kind of destroy the republic as it was known. And so McKinley wins twice. But in 1900, the twist was, this is sometimes how things can backfire, the New York political machine wanted to get Theodore Roosevelt, out of the way. He'd been police commissioner, he'd been governor, and they didn't like his reform-minded ways. And they said, what can we do? Well, let's make him McKinley's vice president. You know, what's a vice president do? Let's get rid of him and he'll disappear for the next 4 years. Well, of course, McKinley was assassinated soon into his second term. And here ends up Theodore Roosevelt as president, one of the most dynamic, popular presidents that the country's ever had. Slogans don't always mean much, or also can backfire. In 1916, the Democrat Woodrow Wilson, seeking a second term, ran on that he had kept the U.S. out of World War I, out of that European mess across the ocean. And so the big slogan was, he kept us out of war. And of course, he won very narrowly. California was the difference. Charles Evans Hughes, as the story goes, went to bed thinking election night that he'd won, only to wake up the next morning and find out that California, who actually had a Republican governor who didn't come out in support of Hughes, they'd had a tiff, that he'd lost California, and hence Wilson had won. And of course, just a month after he's inaugurated for his second term, the U.S. declares war on Germany and the other Central Powers, and the U.S. is in the war. You have to mention FDR, elected 4 times, 4 campaigns he won. Some people, again, saw him as tearing the country, changing what it was in government, that he was a socialist in many ways, things like that. But he guided the U.S. through the Great Depression and World War II. And of course, died in office in April of '45. And his brand new vice president, Harry Truman, takes over, finishes the war. And the Democrats are looking at civil rights. Truman isn't particularly popular. And Dewey, who ran against Roosevelt in '44, is the '48 standard bearer for the Republicans. And they think he's going to win. The polls show he's going to win. Truman is the underdog. But he does a whistle-stop campaign. He pushes civil rights. He desegregated the Army. He integrated women as regular members of the military. The Dixiecrats, who were for segregation, split off with Strom Thurmond. And he actually carried 4 states in the South, but it didn't matter. And Truman actually ends up winning rather handily. You don't see this anymore. Eisenhower versus Adlai Stevenson. Again, same candidates for 2 elections in a row. And cigarettes used as campaign giveaways to try to get your vote. And you just don't do that anymore. A new decade and new leadership. John F. Kennedy defeated Richard Nixon in a close race. TV played an important role, the first televised presidential debate. And Kennedy came off looking very good, young, charismatic, energetic. Nixon had been sick. He had a lot of political baggage. He'd been, of course, Eisenhower's vice president for 2 terms, but he'd been sick. He didn't look good on TV. His makeup wasn't good. One of the big campaign issues that the Republicans pushed was who's going to rule? Is it going to be Kennedy, or is the Pope over in Rome, because Kennedy was a Catholic, going to be just simply telling him what to do? And of course, that was not really an issue. And leave it to Harry Truman, plain speaking, give him hell, Harry, to call it like he saw it. 1964 campaign, Johnson versus Goldwater. The Republicans are tilting more to a conservative stance. Johnson, of course, with his civil rights things that he was trying to accomplish, his great society. And you don't do this anymore. Matchbooks, LBJ for the USA, and with his picture on there, you just don't do that either anymore. And it's negative campaign literature. They're taking certain things out of context. The opposition, how LBJ would remake America there on the right with a caricature of him, basically saying that he's a Robin Hood. He's going to take from the rich and give to the poor, which he really wasn't going to do. So politics go bobbing along. In 2000, the Chads had it. Bush defeated Al Gore. Al Gore, though, won the popular vote. It was an extremely close election. Bush wins the electoral vote 271 to 266, and it's because of Florida. Is this shades of 1876, perhaps, where a little home cooking was going on? Because whether Florida, how they decided who won the state, went to the Supreme Court in a case, and the court decided in favor of Florida's method. Well, Florida's method had two people involved that were very much in the Bush camp. George W.'s brother Jeb, who was governor, and the Secretary of State, who had been his Florida campaign manager. So some people really thought something fishy went on there. First father and son to serve as president since John and John Quincy Adams. In 2004, Bush-Cheney defeated Kerry-Edwards. Terrorism, Iraq were all big issues. And then swift boat politics came up, where it was used against Kerry, who was a Vietnam vet. He'd commanded a swift boat in Vietnam, and that it was a farce, that he was really a coward. He hadn't done what he said he had. He didn't deserve his medals. So a lot of times, again, the other side, the competition gets personal, trying to be negative and tear the candidate down. Much as in 2008. Of course, we were in a financial crisis, but the claim was made against Barack Obama that he wasn't really born in America, that he wasn't eligible to be president. And of course, that wasn't true, but it didn't stop people from making claims like that. 2016, enough said. Mud, and more mud was flung on both sides. A lot of times the true issues aren't really addressed, and it becomes negative and personal attacks as a way to tear the other person down and make them look worse, maybe worse perhaps than you are. And of course, that brings us to 2020. Biden and Harris versus Trump and Pence. Some of the things being around right now. I like the face mask for Biden and Harris, speaking, of course, to the pandemic that we're dealing with. But whomever you support, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, exercise your vote, your right as a U.S. citizen and hopefully as a registered voter to vote. It's very important that we do and engage in the democratic process that we're so fortunate to live in this country. Thank you.
Jim, so beautifully done. Would you have time for a few questions from Rotary?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Okay, great. Well, this one's from Cynthia Miles Brown, and she asks, would you please comment on how women have influenced the campaigns through the ages?
Well, that's a good question, because, even though of course, we're looking at the centennial of the 19th Amendment and women actually being able countrywide to vote. Some women were able to vote in state elections and presidential elections even before the 19th Amendment. But, even though they maybe weren't voting, they were often very influential. And some minor party candidates all actually were candidates, women were candidates through the ages in the late 19th century, and then of course into the 20th as well. So women have always played a role, sometimes behind the scenes, and then of course much more prominently now when they're on major party candidates. But Hillary Clinton, of course, in 2016, and then of course Vice President with Harris this year, and what have you. So that women have played through the years a very important role.
Thank you so much. Here's a question from Ken Grossman, and he'd like to know about the Electoral College. Is it still relevant, or should it be abandoned?
Well, that's a topic of great debate, and I do not know. I'm not a presidential or certainly an Electoral College historian at all, but a lot of people have negative feelings about the Electoral College and how it isn't really truly representative. And whether you want to go strictly popular vote or find some kind of medium in between. But that's a debate that is going to continue, I'm sure, past this campaign and election and forward years to come.
Here's a question from Larry Sloan. Would like to know the history of foreign interference in our presidential election.
I couldn't, I have a plane going overhead here real quick, and so I couldn't hear you, Julie. Go ahead and repeat that, please.
Oh, sure. This is from Larry Sloan, and he asked about the history of foreign interference in our presidential election.
Well, you know, and again, I have limited knowledge of this. This isn't my particular area of specialty, but really until 2016, you never really heard much about foreign interference. And of course, one of the issues, now that's not to say that you know, somebody like, obviously, let's say Winston Churchill during World War II wasn't really hoping FDR would get reelected, you know, and things like that. But it's really a more recent phenomena that with the internet and the trolling and all those kind of social media things that are going on, that foreign influence seems to have really become a concern.
Here's another question. This one has to do with how many times has the winning president not received the popular vote?
I think it's been 5 times, going back to Jackson in 1824, Tilden in 1876, Gore in 2000, Cleveland, I think in one of Cleveland's elections, he ended up winning, I think the term he lost, I think he had, because he was our only president that didn't serve successive terms. I think he won a popular vote but lost in the electoral college. And I think, and there's somebody I'm missing right now, but I think there's been a total of 5 where that candidate didn't win. Oh, well, Hillary Clinton. There you go, Hillary Clinton in 2016. She won by some 3 million, but lost the electoral.
Right. And this is from D. Tran. He'd like to know how you feel about term limits for all public office positions.
Well, there's pros and cons there, and I think, you know, this is now more personal, you know, my own personal view and seeing how things go, that it's good to have fresh blood coming in, and that I think history has shown that the longer, even though they can be very helpful and very useful, that the longer someone is in office, maybe the more interested they are in trying to hold on to their power base in that position. And not everybody would agree with that. And that's not true for every candidate. But that's something that some states have looked at doing and have actually tried to enact and have enacted. But as a federal rule across the board, for those elected at the federal level, that hasn't happened, and it may never happen. I know there's a lot of opposition to something like that taking place.
Right. And here's the last question. It comes from your colleague, from Julie, and she says, campaigns sometimes have catchy tunes and ditties. Do you have some that you can share, and what is a personal favorite?
I do, and there's several, and several of these actually go back to the 1840 election with Harrison, where you really got that infusion of song and poem and things like that. And here's a couple from that. It's farewell, dear Van, you're not our man. To guide the ship, we'll try old Tip. And then, and this is a good one. It's old Tip, he wears a homespun coat. He has no ruffled shirt, wort. But Matt, he has the golden plate, and he's a little squirt, wort. And he was a little guy. His nickname, he had 2 great nicknames, these guys. He was known as the Red Fox of Kinderhook, and also the Little Magician, because he'd been the political behind-the-scenes guy for Andrew Jackson. And then here's a tune, one that we all know is Rockabye Baby. Hushabye baby, daddy's a wig. Before he comes home, hard cider he'll swig. Then he'll be tipsy and over he'll fall. Down will come daddy, Tip Tyler and all. And then I'll give you a last one real quick. And this is one my grandfather used to quote 50 years after the election. And it clearly stuck with him going back to the 1932 election with Hoover and Roosevelt. and I can just hear my grandfather saying this. Mellon pulled the whistle, and he was Andrew Mellon, Hoover's Secretary of the Treasury. Hoover rang the bell. Wall Street gave the signal, and the country went to hell. So it was just, one of those things. And, this is how fame is so fleeting. And a great little story that I'll end on is Herbert Hoover, who had done so much in his career, and his one term as president, was checking into a hotel one day, and he signed the register, and the clerk at the desk is looking at it. He says, "Oh, Mr. Hoover, FBI, G-man." And he says, "No, I'm not that Mr. Hoover." And he goes, and the clerk is like, "Oh, vacuum cleaners. Oh, you're great. We love them." He said, "No, I'm not that Hoover either." And the clerk just kind of has this crestfallen look on his face. He says, "Oh, gee, I thought you were somebody." And so there you go. Fame is fleeting, and it was certainly with that guy and Herbert Hoover. So thank you very much.
Jim, you did a wonderful job. We really appreciate it. Brought some good humor and good information. And so thank you so much. And you know what I love about history is you just can't make it up. So, just thank you so very much. And I know everyone enjoyed your presentation.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you all.
And thank you, Dick and Julie, as well. Thank you all. We appreciate the Filson. Now, our featured speaker next week is U.S. Senate Democratic candidate Amy McGrath. So if you have friends or colleagues you'd like to invite, please give their information to Alyssa so she can give them the secure website information to join us next week. And again, submit your questions. So guests, if you would, if interested in Rotary, please stay on the line for What is Rotary session. And everyone sign up for these fabulous Business Synergy virtual events. Thank you, everyone, and we are adjourned. Bye.